Right, so let's start from where we left off last week. Right, so just a quick recap of what we covered in the first week. We looked at, if you go to the course outline, we looked at a brief introduction to economics. And we looked at consumer behavior and utility. So basically, we looked at the two entities, key entities in the market, the suppliers in terms of demand. And we looked at demand theory and what sort of underpins demand theory. And there we discussed about utility and what creates the demand and why we purchase less or demand less as prices go up. So that we discussed under consumer behavior or demand theory. And then we looked at the producer behavior, where we talked about what factors affect the supply and how we model the supply using supply function, and how and when supply shifts or shifts, right? So basically, we discussed the behavior of the producers. And then we also talked about elasticity, which is a very important concept in economics, where we talked about how to quantify the magnitude of the change in demand, right? The size, by how much, which direction is it going to increase? If, for example, if the prices increase, is it going to increase the supply, increase demand, and so on. So we also talked about the elasticity. We did a few calculations for demand elasticity, but once you know demand elasticity, you can apply the same principles to supply and calculate supply elasticity also. And then we talked about the equilibrium of the market. So I think that's where we stopped last week. So we know that, there's an individual demand for goods and services, and that sort of aggregates up to an aggregate demand. And there's also an aggregate supply in the market, which is an aggregate of all the suppliers. And those two forces, the market demand, and which try to push the demand curve down, and the market supply, the suppliers prefer if the prices are high, so they try to push the supply curve up, the prices up. So these two forces in the market, in an ideal market, we call it a perfectly competitive market or an ideal market. In that side of a market, these two forces interact and they will decide the price, the market price, and the quantity. So P star and Q star are the market equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So this is the price where both the consumers and the suppliers wish or prefer to sell and purchase the goods amount of Q star, right? So everybody's happy at this price and quantity, but we know we don't live in an ideal market. Things change, factors vary, and the prices can artificially go up or down, and that has an impact on the demand and supply. So we saw last week that if the price increases,
recording in progress.
If the price increases, what would happen to the market supply, right? We saw that there would be an excess supply, and if the price goes below the equilibrium price, then there is a shortage in the market, right? Right, so we'll look at another sort of economic phenomenon before we move into today's lecture. For example, what would happen in the case of a tax? Right, so let's take up the demand for a particular good. Let's say demand for tomatoes, right? What would happen if the government imposes a tax on the consumers? Now, this can be done for the producer side as well, but once you understand the demand, then you can apply the same theory for suppliers. So let's start with the demand curve. You know that it's P on this side and Q on the x-axis, and let's draw the demand curve. So this is the original demand curve in the market. Let's call it D naught. Right? And so what can we say? Now, for this good, let's say it starts somewhere here at 1 rupee per kilo. Let's say people demand this much of goods, right? And let's say at 10 rupees per kilo, consumers demand, let's say, 100 kilos. Right. And now, let's say the government wants to impose a 3 rupee tax, right? 3 rupees per kilo, right? An excise tax. There are different types of tax, but let's say this is a unit tax, where a tax is imposed on each unit. And if so, now we know that there are 2 entities in the market initially, but in this case there are 3, right? So there are the consumers, and then there are the producers, and then there's also the government involved if there's a tax. Here, right. So what we understand here is that now on the first day we discussed that the demand also depends on its own price, right? Demand depends on its own price. Now price is what the suppliers get in the market, isn't it? So therefore, if there's a tax of 3 rupees imposed, let's say originally at 10 rupees per kilo, the consumers demanded 100 kilos. But now, since there's a tax of 3, right, what would happen? So now tax is imposed because the government wants to get the revenue from tax. So therefore, this 3 would go to the government, and only 7 rupees will be received, or the suppliers would only get 10 minus 3 is 7 rupees. So we call it, let's see, the same, I'm going to use a different color. So somewhere here, right? Same quantity, but 7 rupees. This is how much. 10 is how much the consumers pay, and 7 is how much the producers receive or get in the market. And then let's take another point. Let's take 13, right? The price goes up to 13 rupees. What would happen if the price goes up? We know it would go down, let's say to 75. And if the price goes down, sorry, if the price goes up, and we know according to demand theory, the quantity goes down to 75. And again here, we know now the consumers pay 13, and the producers would only get 13 minus 3, 10. So if I draw another dot somewhere there, 10 rupees for the same amount, right? So now there are 2 dots here. Now we can easily plot a curve. I'm gonna but what I'm trying to do is I'm just going to draw a curve that connects these 2 points. It's a bit hard to do it using the cursor, but let's try. Something like that. So let's say this is 30. And a little off, but what I'm trying to do is to connect these 2 points. So now there are two. So these are the prices. What you see in green is what although the demand curve of consumers pay more, the producers will get less, 3 rupees less in the market, right? So we call this the effective demand curve. Effective demand curve is actually what the producers get. So let's try to illustrate, both these forces on the same graph to see what would happen to the market equilibrium. So you have the price and quantity, and this would be the original demand curve and quantity, and I'll plot the original supply curve, which for potatoes, that's fruit and do not. And let's say now this is the original price, and 10 rupees originally when there was no government intervention. The equilibrium was 10 rupees, and at that price, people demanded 100 kilos. So now with the tax of 3 rupees, what would happen? And we saw that this this tax would shift the demand curve inwards, because we know as the prices go down, people demand less of the quantity and producers get less. Although people pay more, producers get less. So we could see that now, okay, let's take a point somewhere here. So now there's a new equilibrium here, right? So the new demand curve, which we will call its demand, but this is actually an effective demand curve. So this new demand crosses the supply curve there. So we can see that there's a new equilibrium, demand supply cross. Equilibrium so there's new equilibrium there. So if we say now, because it's a price which is lower than 10, let's say 9, right? And as a result, the quantity also goes down to 75. But this is how much, this is the equilibrium price now, the new equilibrium. So that's how much the producers get. But we know because of the tax, the price the consumers pay should be greater than the original market price, which was 10. 10 is very price consumers pay. Right? So if I use another color, if I take this dotted line all the way up the demand curve, the demand curve we can depend actual demand. So let's say that's about 10 rupees. So 12 rupees, because it should be greater than 10. So now this was the original price. With the tax, the price of a kilo of tomatoes went up to 12, right? And this is how much the consumers pay, and this is how much the producers get. So there is a difference of 3 rupees per kilo, and that is exactly the amount of the tax, wasn't it? So tax, the government said there will be a tax of 3 rupees per kilo or per unit, and this difference is the tax, or this difference, the difference of my tax, which is 3, right? So now what has happened, although the government imposed the tax on consumers, this amount is borne by both the consumers and the producers. Consumers impact producers impact. So if you want to really calculate using monetary values, right, a policymaker or you as an economist would want to calculate the economic impact. How would you do that? By calculating that. You can find the market prices for these points and the demand, and you will calculate the demand on the consumers, the impact on the consumers. We discussed this last week. What would happen to this triangle, which we called as the consumer surplus, right? And then we will look at the impact on the producers, on the suppliers, because we can see that the price that they get has gone down by 1 rupee. Given a price, rupee, given a price, the labin price, 1 rupee willing not well. So there's an impact on the supplier. So that also can be calculated. And then there's another part involved, called the government, isn't it? Government impact which is a positive impact, because they have imposed a tax of 3 rupees, and because of this 3 rupee tax, the original demand went down to 75. And now this is actually a revenue that government gets. It's a positive impact on them. 3 times 75 is the revenue that the government earns from this tax. Right, so that's just one sort of instance or scenario. What would happen if you impose a tax? So you can do a similar analysis for a tariff. For example, if imports and exports are involved, international trade is involved, then what would happen to the economy if you impose a tariff, a tax on goods and services traded internationally, right? So in that case, there's another part involved for the international community. So you can calculate the impact on that party as well, which has a tariff involved. So otherwise, you can do the same thing for a subsidy, not as a quota, price controls, right? So to understand the overall economic impact of these occurrences. Right. So right. Then we will move to today's. So this also, I think we did discuss last week. What would happen to the market equilibrium if there is any external force involved? For example, a supply shifter. What would happen to the market equilibrium if the income of population increases, right? So that what would happen first, initially, if the income increases, that will shift the demand curve for certain goods. You start by shifting the demand curve and calculating the new equilibrium. Similarly, you can look at what would happen to the market equilibrium if there are any external factors involved that would shift the supply curve or shift the demand curve. For example, if there are there's new technology involved that boosts the yield, or if there is, if a lot of new producers come into the market, right, that will shift the supply curve, and then that creates a new equilibrium, right? So likewise, you can sort of illustrate or explain this phenomenon using graphs, right? And now we can move to today's lecture. Right. So far we have looked at the demand, or how consumers make decisions in terms of consumption, and then we looked at supply, right? But basically we focused on the market. Well, now we are going to look a little bit more deeper into the firm, right? So what would happen in the firm in terms of supply, right? So when you learn theory of firm, or when we try to discuss the theory of firm, we try to three types of relationships. Now we know that what happens inside a firm is that goods and services are produced, right, using resources. What are the resources? In economics, we call them as factors of production: land, labor, capital, and management, or entrepreneurship. So we use these four factors of production and transform the factors into goods and services in a firm, right? It could be like raw goods, and goods maybe like crop, paddy, potatoes, vegetables, or it could be value added, right? Canned food, dried food, or whatever. So in a firm, factors of production are transformed into goods and services, right? So therefore, when we discuss the theory of firm, we will consider three relationships actually. Factor-product relationship. Then we will look at factor-factor relationship. Then we will look at the product-product relationship. So factors are inputs, very simply, right? Factors of production, inputs, raw material, fertilizer, water, whatever, labor, inputs. Factors are inputs, then products are outputs. So we will look at input-output relationship, and then we will look at input-input, then output-output relationship. So first, let's look at the factor-product or input-output relationship. Now, this is an important relationship because be it a very technical relationship or an agricultural relationship, biological relationship, we deal with factors, products in a farm. So let's take an example, an agricultural example, because we are focusing on basically economics to apply economic principles in agriculture and food businesses. So here, now let's take an example of a crop, right? Crop production. Let's say wheat production or maize production, right? What factors would affect the production of maize? Let's say simply paddy, right? We all know. What factors affect the production of paddy, right? So the output is paddy. It could be in bushels or kilos or sacks or whatever. That's the output, right? So let's call this output Q. Q stands for the output, right? Amount of output or yield. What factors affect the amount of output produced? Can you give me a few examples of a few factors that affect the quantity of output of paddy? Anyone? Yes, good. Pests and disease attacks. So, so pest and disease attacks can determine the quantity produced. What else? Anyone else? Fertilizer, very good. Rainfall, good. Climate change factors, weather factors, rainfall, temperature. Right. So we all know what factors would affect the quantity of an output produced. Quality of seeds, good. Right, so all these factors, fertilizer, the amount of land, extent, capital, machinery used, the labor, the number of laborers employed, water, seeds, all these factors will determine the amount of paddy produced. So apart from these, I can think of so many other factors, right? So one of you said rainfall, temperatures, very important, right? So that would determine, apart from these factors, I can include rainfall or temperature. So we call this weather factors, yeah? And if there are any climate change effects, that can be included. What else? Government intervention would have an impact, doesn't it? If the government decides to give a subsidy or a quota, then that's going to affect the production. What else? Tariffs, imports, right? So you get that we can think of so many factors that could affect the quantity produced. But we know now, once you identify the factors, you can estimate a model to understand the impact of these factors on the quantity. Like, for example, if I want to understand what would happen if weather changes, for example, if the rainfall patterns change, what would happen to the quantity? If the labor price of labor goes down or up, what would happen to the quantity produced of paddy? What else? Technology changes, right? If the government imposes a tariff on paddy imports, so those things will have an impact on quantity, and by estimating a function, I can understand the direction where quantity అటువైపు వెనకాల, or the sign or the magnitude, by how much. There's a 10% increase, what would happen to the quantity produced. And I can also, using this function that you see here, or this model, I can predict what would happen to the quantity in 2 years' time or 5 years' time using the data. So you collect data for these factors, output, labor, capital, and so on. And if you use time also as a factor, I collect the quantity produced of paddy for the last 20 years, and I can do a forecast into the future. So likewise, we can estimate this model to understand the impact of the factors on production, right? So therefore, we call this a production function. Now, you're familiar with this term function, demand function, supply function. So similarly, it's simply a model that shows relationship between factors that affect the production or yield and the final output or the yield. Right? It's a relationship with a model of production function. So input-output relationship production function. So now, just to understand how we do the analysis or do the estimations, we are going to take one factor at a time. Actually, this time we're just going to look at one factor. What's the factor we're going to look at? So production involves transformation of inputs, such as capital, equipment, labor, and land into outputs, which are goods and services. Now, let's take two factors and consider all other factors to be constant or fixed. Right? So we assume that those factors don't change. So I'm going to take the output as one factor as a function. Here again, as a function, can I make a method dependent on as a function of an input. Let's take fertilizer, because I know fertilizer is a key factor that affects quantity of paddy produced in a fertilizer. So paddy production the relationship. Assuming all other factors are constant, right? Weather, technology, labor prices. Now these things don't change. Water quantity. these are fixed and don't change. About fertilizer, quantity measure we will look at the relationship between quantity and fertilizer, which is an input. Fertilizer is an input, isn't it? So now if I plot a graph between fertilizer use and quantity, let's say I want to do an experiment and I plant or cultivate a crop and I change the fertilizer amount from 0, then I add 1 unit, 2 units, 3 kilos, 4 kilos likewise, and then I measure the yield, and that would give me a relationship between yield and nitrogen, right? Let's say the nitrogen fertilizer, urea, any nitrogen fertilizer against yield. Now, can someone tell me if is there a name for this graph? I mean, the shape of the graph. Can anyone remember the name if you have studied science for your A-levels? You should be able to recall what we call this graph. Anyone? What's this shape called? Any answers? No? This is a sigmoidal shape, isn't it? Sigmoidal shape because it's a biological relationship. Now, if you plot the growth of a living being or a plant, you will see a similar shape. But if I draw an input-output relationship of a very technical relationship, like let's say in a textile factory or a canned food production factory, I have, let's say, the input on this side and output on this side. And if you don't, output is denoted by Y, or let's call it OP, output. Now, this is the input. If there's no raw material or input, then there will be 0 output, isn't it? Food production factory, canned food, textile production factory, raw material, cloth, raw material output so that would be 0 here then. Right? Input output a linear pattern even. Right? So this is a very technical relationship, but this is not what you would see in a biological relationship. So when you do agriculture, that's why you initially study, when you study agriculture and plantation management, that's why you also study the science behind the plant or production. You study the physiology, horticulture, crop biology, chemistry, and so on. So you understand the science behind, because that is important to make the right decision. So at the same time, you learn agricultural economics or principles of economics to apply in agricultural production to make the right decisions in terms of both input use and output. Right? So to do that, you need to understand the science behind the biological relationships that we deal with, right? In agriculture, we deal with biological relationships, crop production, right? Production of crops like fruits or vegetables, horticultural crops, floriculture, and so on. And then we deal with livestock production, right? Dairy products, milk production, egg production, meat, ornamental fish, aquaculture, and so on. So once you understand the science or the physiology, it's it also helps you to make the right decisions, because in economics, if you input data to a software, you get a lot of, you get the output, right? But the science behind it is important to make the right decisions. Input to data feed software, you get any output, right? But you have to have that background to make the right decision. So coming back to this graph, now what we have done here is we have plotted the input, which is fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer, and against yield, right? So unlike in the case of a technical relationship, you would see that, so there's zero nitrogen at this point. We're pointing 0, 0 Now, when nitrogen is 0, you can see that there's still a certain amount of yield, right? Harvest in a crop or in dairy production or whatever, in a biological relationship, even if you don't add any nitrogen, the plant can still absorb some nutrients from the soil and produce a certain amount of yield, or you can still see a growth. So now, that's why we start here, there, and as you increase the amount of nitrogen fertilizer, let's say 1, you add another unit, and then you measure the output, and then you add another unit there, 3, 4, likewise, each time you increase an additional unit of fertilizer. And when you do that, you will find that you get this type of a curve. Right, we say that initially the plant or the yield increases at an increasing rate. But once it reaches a particular point, yield still increases. Yield anyways, what we want to understand here is that the yield increases and it reaches a maximum point. Let's say now here you add the 10th unit of fertilizer, 10th unit එක දානකොට තමයි අපිට maximum yield එකක් ලැබෙන්නේ. Right? අපි හිතමු yield එක 50 kilos bushels, it says, right? We get the maximum yield. And then we can see if you add the 11th unit, unit 11th unit yield is decreasing. So it's possible, isn't it? Sometimes the fertilizer might be poisonous to the tree. Right? Any input can have an adverse impact if you use more than what's required. Right? Now we can see as you increase the input, the the output decreases. You could see that with any biological relationship, livestock production or whatever. And so you will see this type of a typical if you plot an actual relationship. Now, right, so as economists or students who study economics, we are interested in knowing the optimum amounts to use. Where do we make the decision? What is the optimum amount of fertilizer to use? What's the optimum amount of yield to maximize profit? Because at the end of the day, for an agribusiness, what we want to understand or we want to know is how do we maximize profit? So in order to maximize profit, we want to maximize the revenue and minimize cost. And cost minimize කරන්න අපිට දැනගන්න ඕනේ අපි ගන්න ඕනේ optimum input amount එක කීයද, produce කරන්න ඕනේ optimum output එක කීයද කියලා. To do that, okay, let's see how we go about doing that and why is this important, right? It's important because if you use more than what's required, if you use more fertilizer than what's required, urea වැඩිපුර පාවිච්චි කරොත්, it's expensive on one hand because urea is expensive, right? And it can have an adverse impact on the plant, right? Plant එක negative effect එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, poisonous වෙන්න පුළුවන්. At the same time, it will have detrimental impacts on the environment. Environment එකට තියෙන impact එකක් negative වෙන්න පුළුවන්, right? If it leaches to the soil, the waterways, that will pollute, and that will affect both the humans, the flora, the fauna, animals, plants, all of that. So there's a lot of factors that we have to consider if you actually estimate the economic impact of nitrogen fertilizer on the yield. But in this lesson, we are only going to look at maximizing profit. So now we will see or try to find where you want to maximize the how to find the optimum amount of inputs to use and output to produce in order to maximize the profit of the farm, right? So to do that, we have to understand the use of inputs or the type of inputs used. So there are two types of inputs. We say variable and fixed inputs. Okay, so have a read. Just read through the slide and see if you can think of any examples of variable and fixed inputs. Now, variable inputs, it says, farmer can control or alter the level of use. And for fixed inputs, definition is farmer has no control over the amount available. Now, although I've used the term farmer, this can mean the decision maker. It could be you. If you own a production, if you own a farm, it could be you, the farmer or the manager who takes decisions in terms of using the resources. So, although I have used the term farmer, it means the decision maker of the farm, right? Now, we categorize these inputs depending on the time of use or the duration. And in economics, we divide time into two as short run, and long run, right? But we will also see sometimes there's a medium run, but now here we will only talk about short run and long run time or duration, right? So short run and long run is important to understand the difference between these two inputs. So we say that in the short run, you find both, let's call this B, and fixed inputs would be F. Both B and F are found in the short run. And in the long run, we say you only find variable input. So what's the difference then? In short run is a time period long enough to afford a change or vary the inputs used, right? We say in the short run, you get both variable inputs and fixed inputs. So variable inputs are inputs that you can easily vary, like fertilizer, water, seeds, labor, amount of laborers that you use during the season. So these things can easily be varied by the farm. Farmer decide කරන්න පුළුවන් කොච්චර amount එකක් මේවා use කරනවාද කියලා. Seeds කොච්චරද, fertilizer අපි ගිය season එකට වඩා වැඩිපුර මේ මාසෙ use කරනවාද. So likewise, you can vary the input, variable input. When it comes to fixed inputs, we say in the short run, you cannot change the fixed inputs like the land extent, the labor, the machines that I have, right? So therefore, short run එකක් ගත්තොත් දෙකම තියෙනවා. Variable inputs උත් තියෙනවා, fixed inputs උත්. But in the long run, we say even the variable inputs can vary. Right? Variable inputs vary වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ කියන්නේ land එක මට 6 months වලදී vary කරගන්න බැරි වුණා. So it's a fixed inputs in the first 6 months of production, but in the second 6 months maybe, or in the second year, I can increase my land. Land එක then vary කරගන්න පුළුවන්. So there are two types: variable, which can easily be varied, and there are fixed inputs, which you cannot vary in the short run, but in the long run, you can vary the fixed inputs. Right. So given that, when you estimate the production function to identify the profit maximization point, we have to understand, or we can derive 3 types of relationships from the production function. Now we said that quantity, or the output, or let's call this yield. Yield is a function of fertilizer. Okay? Fertilizer matter. Fertilizer ප්‍රමාණය. So then, now this graph shows the total product. Fertilizer වෙනස් කර we have measured the total amount of production. Total product එක තමයි අපි measure කරලා තියෙන්නේ. So this graph shows the total product. TP කියලා කියන්නේ total product. Now from this, we can derive 2 other relationships. මේක නම් total product එක. අපිට මේකෙන් calculate කරන්න පුළුවන් average product, which is important. Average product. So average product then is what? Quantity divided by the amount of fertilizer. Average it's the amount per unit of fertilizer. එක fertilizer unit එකකට ලැබෙන quantity එක. නැත්නම් output. Marginal product එකක් අපිට ගන්න. Marginal product කියලා කියන්නේ change in quantity to a change in fertilizer. Change in fertilizer. Right? Fertilizer එක unit එකකින් වැඩි කරොත් කොච්චර ප්‍රමාණයකින් මේ total product එක වැඩි වෙනවද? Right? එහෙනම් මේකේ slope එක තමයි marginal product. මේකෙන් අපිට calculate කරන්න පුළුවන් marginal product එකත් change in Q to a change in fertilizer. එක එකක් වැඩි කරොත් වැඩි වෙන ලැබෙන quantity එක. Right? So let's look at some numbers. Now here you find a few numbers. In the first column, you find the total. The first 2 columns is relationship between the total product. Workers la ප්‍රමාණය picking එකකින් add කරගෙන යනකොට ලැබෙන total product. Right? So total product is given. Using this total product, you can calculate the average product. Right? So average product then is what? එකකට ලැබෙන output එක අපි හිතමු. Total product එක බෙදනවා the number of laborers ළඟ. එහෙනම් එක laborer කෙනෙකුට එක labor unit එකකට ලැබෙන total product. Right? And then we can also calculate the marginal product. Marginal product කියලා කියන්නේ change in total product. Now this term marginal is familiar to you because we did something similar with utility. Marginal utility calculate කරා. ඒ විදිහටම අපිට පුළුවන් marginal product එක calculate කරන්න. එතකොට අපි ගන්නේ change in total product to a change in number of workers. Right. So now what you can do is try to fill at least the first 3 to 4 rows from 1 to 4 using you can substitute the numbers to these simple equations and fill the average product and the marginal product. right? So see if you can give it a try and try to fill the first 4.
Recording stopped.
So you can take about 5 minutes to do that and then take another 5-minute break, and we will discuss the answers, right? So we will be back by 9:35. Right, so in the meantime, try to fill the 2 columns using average product and marginal product, and then you can take a 5-minute break. Okay? You find difficult, or if you want me to explain again, I'm happy to go through the table. Right, so let's just have a look at the first row.
Recording in progress.
Right, so we wanted to calculate the average product and the marginal product. The average product is actually the total product divided by 1. So what we've done here is 24 is the total product. This we divided by the number of workers. So here, for the second one, it would be 72 over 2, and that's 36. Right, so now this gives us the average product, meaning the product or the output per unit of. So in this case, it's the yield per unit of worker, per 1 worker, isn't it? The output per 1 worker. And then we can calculate the marginal product. Now, we know by now that marginal product, or the term marginal, is very important because we say we try to make decisions at the margin, and we will see how as we go through the coming slides. So we would want to know the product, the additional product produced when you increase 1 extra unit, or when you add 1 extra unit of fertilizer, right? The additional product when you add 1 extra unit of fertilizer, right? එහෙනම් fertilizer වැඩිපුර එක unit එකක් පාවිච්චි කරනකොට වැඩිපුර ලැබෙන product, marginal product, right? So how do you calculate that? Right, so let's assume that was 0 there, and that difference is 24. And for this one, 72 minus 24 is 48. So this difference divided by this difference. So 72 minus 24 is 48. 48 divided by this difference is 1. Like you get 48. Right, so go through the columns and see if you can sort of infer or find a pattern, right? You can even take a piece of paper and try to plot, because it's easier if you plot a graph to understand relationship. So try to plot. Doesn't have to be proportionate, but just, you can try and plot at least a function, right? So try to take a piece of paper and plot these two relationships, workers on the x-axis and the product on this axis, on the y-axis. So total product on this axis and the number of workers on this axis, and see how it would look. Right. So this is how it would look like. I mean, these are not the exact data, but a typical graph, if you plot all these three curves on the same graph, it would look like this, right? So you have the total product function there, and the average product, and the marginal product on the same graph. So what do you see here? Now, in the first two columns, as you can see, as you, let's say, employ a worker each time, right? Or if it's fertilizer, if you add fertilizer or any input, let's say now you employ the fifth one, sixth one, seventh, eighth. Likewise, you keep adding one extra worker each time, and you can see the total product increasing. And you add the 10th worker, you employ the 10th worker, and that sort of the product reaches its maximum when you add 10th worker. And then you employ another person. If you do that, we can see that the total product starts going down. It could be that, you have more people on the field than required, and that's going to disturb your cultivation. And therefore, the product starts going down. So 11th, 12th, Otherwise, this is like the maximum, this is the optimum point where you get the maximum amount of yield, and thereafter each input will reduce the total product, right? So that's what you can see here, isn't it? Maximum marginal product and average product are the same. You can see average product reaches its maximum when you add the 8th worker, and then it goes down. Marginal product is also the same. 6th worker down to make a maximize. Afterwards, it goes down here. So comes to a maximum and then starts decreasing. Right. So now you can see the output increases, comes to a maximum, and then starts decreasing. And these are also the same, the other two graphs. Now the question is, how do you decide on the profit maximizing point? How much of inputs to use to produce the maximum amount of output that would maximize your profit, right? So to do that, we will look at two scenarios. One is when the input is given free, right? Free. If something is given free, input can fertilizer now. Y is the output. If X of fertilizer is given free, we say that you don't have to worry about anything. You can, the farmer or the producer can reach the maximum point of production. Right? So if it's free, then we look at the second scenario. When things are priced, right? When fertilizer is priced, we know that fertilizer, of course, is priced, and any input would be priced, therefore, in the market. Therefore, now we'll have to decide on the optimum point, right? To do that, we look at the constraint. So what would determine the profit, right? The two key things that would determine my profit in terms of input and output, right, are the prices of the two products. Output eකට price එකක් තියෙනවා, input eකට price එකක් තියෙනවා. So when these factors vary, the prices vary, that would determine my profit. So therefore, now I'm going to incorporate or include these two factors into my analysis. So I'm going to, so we can show how you derive this particular relationship, but at this point, I'm only going to show you the the formula, which is we say that the marginal product, the extra product that you get or the additional product that you get by using one additional unit of input, marginal product maker, times the price of a unit of output, marginal product times price. Then we don't know quantity එක price එක වැඩි කරා අපිට ලැබෙන්නේ value එක නේ. Value quantity times price. So that value, when that equals the price of one extra unit of fertilizer, right? මේ දෙක input එකේ එක unit එකකට සමාන වෙන තැනද cannot be profit maximizing point එක කියනවා, right? In the coming slides, we will see a relationship called marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This is where we say that any firm would maximize profit. So make a derive function, but we will not go into detail. But what we want to understand is we will use this formula to find the optimum point. Now, to do that, we can find the marginal product calculate කරගන්න පුළුවන්. Then the price of output, PY, අපි either make a banana කියලා, right? Or any product, right? Kilo එකක price. This is fertilizer, එක kilo එකක price. Now, once you find these two values from the market, you can apply to this formula and find the optimum point. අපිට මේක solve කරාම ලැබෙනවා X කියන amount එක කොච්චරද කියලා. Right? So X is this amount. X is this amount. So what ඒක හොයාගත්තට පස්සේ අපිට හොයාගන්න පුළුවන් profit maximizing output එක කීයද කියලා. Right? The amount of banana to produce using this optimum amount of X. Now you can see this amount depends on price of X and Y. So we can see when these two change, price එක වැඩි වෙනකොට අඩු වෙනකොට මේ point එක මේ පැත්තට නැත්නම් මේ පැත්තට යනවා. Right? So we can also look at what would happen. Any farmer would want to shift this curve. Their total product එක වැඩි කරගන්න තමයි කැමති, but there are certain factors that would shift. We will not discuss those factors. But here, what we want to understand is we can, once you know the prices, market prices, then we can sort of try to find the optimum amount of fertilizer and to produce to maximize profit. Right. And then, so that's about the factor-product relationship. Now we will look at the other type of relationship, which we call as the factor-factor relationship. Right. Let's just go through the slide quickly. So in the previous slide in the lesson, we talked about factor-product relationship or input-output relationship, right? The output when you're using one input, eka input eka output eka. Now here we are going to look at the production using more than one input, actually two inputs, because since we are doing the graphs manually, it's difficult to use more than that. But to understand the principle or the theory behind it, we will look at the production of one output using two inputs, like two factors. What are the two factors? one input and one output. Sorry, two inputs and one output. Earlier we looked at one input, one output. Now we will look at two inputs and one output. So this could be two fertilizers, right? Let's say urea and phosphate or potash, two inputs, any two, right? Or it could be water and fertilizer. It could be water and seeds, seeds and labor, labor and capital. Any two inputs at the same time to produce one output, right? So we are going to look at how do you decide on the optimum amount of two inputs do you produce the profit maximizing amount of output. Right, so look at this table. In the first column, there's one input, which is K. K stands for capital, right? It could be the number of machines, for example. And L stands for labor, right? L stands for labor, the number of laborers and the number of machines, maybe, right? Two inputs, dekak paanch karna. And then I plot or I record the output that I get, right? For example, we say 1 unit of K and 1 unit of labor. Ek labor unit ekai, ek machine eka use karot 4 units of output labor. It was 8 units of labor, sorry, 8 units of K and 1 unit of would be 37. Likewise, I have recorded all the levels, different levels for different combinations of capital and labor. Right. And then what have I done? Now what I've done here is I have connected the output levels, same output levels from different combinations of inputs, right? Same output level. Now here you see 73 that is produced using, okay, let's take this one, 29. 3 units of K and 2 units of L would give me 29. 2 units of K and 3 units of L would give me 29. And you connect those 2 points. And here also, you get the same amount of output, 52, but different levels of labor and capital. The labor capital venas karata, ekama output level like a labor. So now I've connected those points and you can see that I've drawn a line connecting, and that particular curve is called an isoquant. Iso means same. Quant means quantity, right? Isoquant is same quantity curve, right? So now you can see if you use more of K, let's say 8, and more of L, which is labor, I get 96, right? අපිට පේනවා වැඩිපුර දෙකම use කරොත් වැඩිපුර ලැබෙනවා, right? So as a farmer or as a producer, you want to increase our production, okay? But let's take one curve out. And if you draw all these curves on a graph, which I have x2 is one input, let's say this is K, and this is labor. And these are all the curves that you find on this table. And so one of these is called an isoquant. And if you plot several on the same graph, we call it an isoquant map. Now this one is called an isoquant. Several would be called an isoquant map. Right. So let's take one. Right. Let's start at 29. 29, 52, 73, likewise. So this is, the level is 29, then we saw 52, 73. Likewise, you can see as you move forward, right? As you increase the two inputs, you get a greater level of output of 100 kilo. Right, but let's take this particular output level, 29 level. If you start here, let's say 10, a particular level of K and a particular level of L. we get this 29. And then if I want to increase the level of labor, our laborers වැඩි කරලා capital. එම output එකම ගන්න ඕනේ. To do that, we will have to reduce the number of capital used, right? අපි L වැඩි කරොත්, if you want to stay on the same output level, we will have to give up more and more capital, isn't it? අපිට give up කරන්න වෙනවා එම level එකම ගන්න ඕනේ, right? But instead, if you say increase both kx2 or say k or k or L and k both, if you increase both by a certain amount, what would happen? Which may ප්‍රමාණයට වැඩි කරොත් දෙකම, what would happen? Then you can go up to a higher output level. Maybe this would be 110. But if you want to stay on the same level, if you increase one input, you have to reduce the other input, which we call as what? Trade-off, isn't it? We talked about this in the first day. You have to forego, that is a trade-off. We do this because there is a limitation. There are resources are scarce, right? So that's that. And then if you want to calculate this, which we'll have to do if you're actually quantifying this, and this is called the marginal rate of this slope is called the marginal rate of technical substitution. Technical means because you're using technical units, inputs, rate of substitution. L and K are substitutable. එකක් වෙනකොට තව එකක් substitute කරන්න වෙනවා. L වෙනකොට K or K වෙනකොට L පාවිච්චි කරන්න පුළුවන්. හින්දා විතරයි මේ වගේ graph එකක් අඳින්න පුළුවන්. If they are not substitutable, you will see a graph like this. Right? K and L තියෙන graph එකේ මේ graph එකක් තමයි 11. So anyways, now these are substitutable. It making up the rate at which one could be substituted with the other. Right. Now what we want to understand is where do we produce? Now as a farmer, we wish to increase our production. 110, 120, 130. Likewise, we want to increase our production or output, but we are constrained by certain things. So before that, does this graph remind you of something? The similar graph that we discussed on the first day. Can someone tell me? Yes, if you can recall, we talked about, we discussed the utility, which gave us a similar graph, which we called as the indifference curve, right? So on the production side, the producer side, something similar. The theory behind this is also similar. Here we look at the same amount of production given two different inputs. So, or the output given two inputs. So that's called an isoquant. Right. So now, as a farmer, as a producer, we want to increase our production. But we are limited, isn't it? We are limited, or we are constrained by two key things. There are so many constraints, but we will only consider two. But here, isoquants are usually downward sloping, and they make this side. So they are convex to the origin. Right, so two things. One are the constraints in production. Mainly, it's the budget we have to spend, the cost of production, which mainly depends on the prices of input. Here, price of X1, price of labor, and price of capital. Dependent on it. So now, if you want to identify the optimum point of production, we will have to superimpose, or we have to draw this curve on the same graph, right? So now to do that, we will have to find what we call as the cost curve, or it's actually called an isocost line. Where C, or the cost that I have in my pocket, is spent on the entire cost spent on labor and price of labor. Number of laborers like වැඩි කරනවා. ඊපස්සේ capital වැඩි කරනවා එකක මිලෙන්. එකක price එක. So then this amount cost. And once you find the cost curve, then you can draw both these curves on the same graph. Right? So that's what I've done here. Now this curve would look like, I'm not going to derive this again because we did under utility. So you would have K on this side and L on this side, and this cost curve, or it's a cost line we call it, well, it's a cost line, will look something like this. So now I have the cost or the constraints. Mage constraints tika ma graph එක තියෙනවා. ඊට පස්සේ මගේ wishes ටික තියෙන වෙනම graph එක. This is how much I want to produce, the output. Habai, I'm constrained by the prices. If I draw both these graphs on the same graph, then that would help me to find the optimum point. Right? You can see now this budget line touches or is tangent or tangents this curve at this point. This is the optimum. We'll call this K and L. Two inputs, K and L. Optimum amount of K and L can be found. Now, what else would happen? So cost depends on the price of A and the price of L. Optimum points would depend on the market prices. Capital එකකමිල සහ labor unit price එක මත මේක වෙනස් වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම අපි ගාව තියෙන cost එක දැන්. For some reason, if I get more money and if I can increase my budget, then I can shift this. Otherwise, if these change, price of K hari, price of L hari අඩු වැඩි වුණොත්, that would shift this, change the slope of this curve. Either එක්කෝ මට වැඩි output එකක් හදාගන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි. එහෙම නැත්නම් prices වැඩි වුණොත් I will have to shift this curve backwards. Right? And accordingly, my optimum amounts will vary. Right, so that's the relationship between factors, factor-factor relationship. And then we will look at the third type of relationship, which is factor-product. Right, so before we move to factor-product relationship, do you have any questions up to what we have discussed by now?
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Okay, so the third type of relationship we will look at is the product-product relationship. And what do we mean by product-product relationship? We know that in a firm, you would produce more than one product at the same time. It could be two crops. Maybe you want to produce two crops in the same land. Maybe in the same factory you produce two products. Maybe you want to produce coconut and banana, coconut and pineapple. You want to do coconut with livestock. Two enterprises on the same in the same firm or in the same resources. So when you produce more than one, in this case two outputs or products using the given resources, we would want to know the optimum amount of products to produce to maximize profit, right? So to understand that, we learn the product-product relationship. So this relationship is shown using a production possibilities curve or a frontier, right? So this is an important concept in economics because this concept can be applied to a firm and even to the economy to understand, different things like scarcity, because when you draw this curve or when we learn this concept, we do certain assumptions. For example, we assume that the technology is fixed, does not change. We assume fixed resources, like fixed amount of land, fixed amount of labor, capital, and so on, for a given period, right? For a given period, within that year, all resources are fixed, and given those resources, we produce two products. Now, if you have like 100 people working in the firm, we assume that you can't hire more people or the people will not leave within that period. With that fixed 100, we produce these two products, right? You can apply the same concept to the economy to understand how you should use the resources, what are the efficient points, whether we should produce all the products in the country, or whether we should consider international trade, and if so, how much of international trade. To understand the principles, we can use this graph. So product-product relationship or the production curve is an important concept. So it's a model that shows alternative ways that an economy can use its resources, scarce resources, right? So because the resources are scarce, you get this type of a relationship, or you get this type of a curve, right? So you can see that it's a poured out curve, and in fact, say it's a concave curve. It's not like this. Instead, it's this shape because of the scarcity of resources, right? So let's go through this now. So this is a classic example that you will find in textbooks. You have guns on this side and butter. So this is a consumable good and this is a capital good. Therefore, we have two products on the two axes, and we are looking at different combinations of products produced in this firm or in this economy. Let's take another example. Now, assume that this country or this economy, or even if you consider a firm, this firm produces bikes and wheat, right? So initially, let's say this firm produces bikes only, no wheat, right? They produce a capital good, which is bikes only, no wheat is produced, right? And now we assume certain things. We assume that there's no change in technology during the given year. Technology is fixed, right? All machines ganda, varieties develop. That does not happen, but technology is fixed. Resources, land, labor, capital, management, all these resources are also fixed, right? Meaning that, you can't hire more people. If it's a country, you can't get people from abroad to work in Sri Lanka, or people don't leave the country within that period of time. So given those assumptions, we say that if you don't produce any wheat, using these resources, we can produce 14 units of bikes, 14 bikes. Now let's assume that this firm wants to produce wheat, right? Then let's take one resource out. Let's take labor. Now, using the resources, using all the labor that we have in the company, we would want to produce 2 units rather of wheat. 2 units of wheat. Right, so I'm sorry I had my computer on mode. So if you had any questions, please let me know. Or if you want to send any messages in the chat box, please feel free to do so. Right. So I increase the amount of wheat up to 2. But now we have to remember that we have actually used the same labor. And bikes produce calculatable labor තමයි අපි wheat production වලට අරගෙන තියෙන්නේ. So when you train the first set of labor to produce wheat, right, you would take the best people, right? High intellectual capacity, very active. You would get the best lot to initially train on wheat, right? Because their skills, they catch up fast. So therefore, you take the first set of good people to produce wheat, and you train them to produce wheat. So you can see now, because we had a fixed resource, fixed reserve of labor, you will have to, when you produce 2 units of wheat, we had to forego 2 units of bikes. There are 14 in the 12 at Advela there, when you produce 2 units of wheat, right? And you take the best people out, produce wheat now, and we say, okay, now wheat is profitable, so we would want to produce more wheat. How they cooking medical now? Wheat production. Same company, same resources. Okay. 4 units. So what happens here? Now, when you produce 4 units, you can see the number of bikes that you had to forego has gone up all the way down from 12 to 8, isn't it? Now, earlier, when you increase the production by 2 units, you only had to give up 2 units of bikes. To give up 2 units of bikes. Now, when you increase the wheat production by 2 more units, you have to forego 4 units of bikes. Then after pay now, then forego 4 units. Then after pay now, n in the වැඩි කරගෙන යනකොට 6. තව දෙකකින් වැඩි කරන තවත් give up කරන්න වෙනවා. So when you produce more and more wheat, you have to forego more and more bikes. Okay? So what does this mean? This happens because of the scarcity of resources. එක අපිට ඕන තරම් labor තිබ්බනම් area එකකින් ගෙනල්ලා හරි වැඩි කරගන්න පුළුවන් වුණා නම් that the graph would have looked different. But now, since there's a scarcity of labor, we have to draw people out of bike production to train them on wheat because we have a limited amount of labor, limited resources, or scarce resources here. Right? So if I draw a curve, this curve shows the most efficient points of production for a firm or for economy. Let's say this economy produces bikes and wheat. So these are the efficient points of production for the economy. What happens now? Right. But if I ask you, okay, now this graph shows scarcity of production, trade-off. Why? Because when you product wheat, you have to forego bikes. And bike selling income. You have to forego the income from bikes. Therefore, there's a trade-off. There's an opportunity cost. The amount of income that you lose from bikes, the bike income that you lose, it is your opportunity cost. You know that by now. and efficiency. These are efficient points of production. A, B, C, D, E. O number point are efficient points for different combinations of bikes. Now, given that, if I ask you, can you produce somewhere here, let's say 4 units of bikes and 2 units of wheat, is this point an efficient point? Yes, it's not an efficient point. Why? Because we can see now, when you produce 4 bikes using the resources that we have, we can actually go up to this many wheat. With a method of 7 kilo, 7 units are done more when you produce 4, but instead we settle for 2 units of wheat. So therefore, this is not an efficient point. We say the resources are underemployed or inefficient production. And this is an efficient point, we know that. And if you take a point beyond above the efficient curve, can you achieve that? So given the technology, given the resources, we cannot achieve that point. But if you relax these assumptions, or if you increase the technology, if you increase the amount of labor, and if you want to push this, you will be able to push this curve up, right? So that is what an economy or a firm would want to do. They would want to, or they want to push this curve forward using different strategies, so you can produce more, because any firm, any economy would want to produce more bikes and more wheat, more products, right? You have to push this forward. So what factors would push this curve? Right, so what would factors would shift the production possibility curve, right? So change in resource quantity or quality can push the curve forward. Change in technology, if you mechanize the farm, or if you bring in more better software, better packages, better machines, then that could improve or push the curve forward. Change in trade, specialization, and specialization would increase the efficiency, and that would push the curve forward. And, for example, in the example that we took the labor case, now that's why country and economy would want to train their labor, because even if you have an abundance of labor in Sri Lanka, if they are not skilled, then that labor factor will become scarce. Therefore, an economy would want to train them, skill them, reskill them, introduce more additional training programs, diplomas, degrees. You see a lot of technology degrees being, faculties opening up in almost all the universities in the country, so that you can produce more skilled people. right? Otherwise, labor also become skilled labor will become a limiting factor, right? That will shrink this instead of pushing this forward, right? Instead of pushing, will shrink this curve, right? Okay, so that's about the types of the 3 types of relationships that I want to discuss. So any questions?
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
And now we will move into the cost theory. So we know that the ultimate objective of a firm is to maximize profit, and how do you do that? By profit. Profit is what? Profit is the difference between revenue and cost. Right? So we looked at the production function, how you would maximize the production, and in order to maximize profit, you would maximize revenue and minimize cost. So now we're going to look at the cost aspect of this production, profit maximization. Right. So when you take cost, there are mainly 2 types of cost broadly, right? One we call as explicit costs. These are, or in other words, they are called accounting costs, money costs. These are the costs that would show up in your financial statement. An accountant would only consider these types of costs, explicit costs, right? Out-of-pocket costs mainly. For example, the payments that you make for the factors of production. What are the factors of production? Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, right? So for labor, for land, it would be the rent. For labor, it's the wage, capital, interest, entrepreneurship, salary, or shares, or the profit. So these are the factors of production, and or insurance, advertising. Any out-of-pocket cost would come under explicit cost. Then implicit costs are costs that are not tangible. A good example would be the opportunity cost, where we already know what opportunity cost means. For example, if you have 2 options and you forego one option, the benefit that you lose out cost you, so that's called an opportunity cost, right? So here, if you have a plot of land and you can cultivate this, or you can build a building, and if you have a building, then that would earn you some rent. So if you can only go for one option, then you forgo the rent. If rent is 5,000 per month, then that's your opportunity cost, 5,000. That will also show up as an implicit cost if you are doing an economic analysis. Right? So apart from that, you will also consider other cost types like social cost now. If you build, let's say, an industry or a plant to produce processed food, right? Let's say you want to farm or a plant to dry fruits, so food processing factory. So this could have social benefits as well as social costs and private benefits and private costs. So social cost would be, social benefit is if you provide jobs to the people in the area, that would be a social benefit. And if you make this area nice, that people can enjoy your garden or whatever, that's a social benefit. But at the same time, if this firm is polluting, so sort of emits carbon, other sulfur dioxide or whatever, or if it throws away or disposes all its waste into the nearby lake, that is the social cost, right? So if you're doing an economic analysis, you would also look into these types of social costs and benefits apart from the accounting costs. You'd also look at certain economic costs and benefits, right? Right, so that's just for your understanding. Now, coming back to the cost theory, to understand or to calculate the cost, we divide the total cost of the firm into two, fixed cost and variable cost. Now, when you read the slide, we discussed this earlier as well. Just have a read and see if you can understand or think of some examples for fixed cost and variable cost. Right, so fixed cost includes overhead costs or supplementary costs, do not change with the change in the variable costs change with the level of output. Now, in the first, when we discuss the production function, we saw that the output produced, yield, or the output, let's call it Q, the output, quantity of output or yield produced varies with what? The input, fertilizer or water or whatever the input used. Fertilizer amount output amount. So this input is attached to a cost, doesn't it? Prices of input, the amount you pay for to purchase inputs is a cost. So we can see that now this quantity then is related or it changes or it varies with the output. So now when you, in cost theory, we look at cost in terms of output, in terms of output. Output එක vary කරනකොට cost එක vary වෙනවා. Right, so any examples for variable costs? Now we know that resources like water or labor or fertilizer, seeds, those are variable. So those are variable costs and fixed costs could be costed. associated with the fixed inputs, right? So keeping that in mind, how would you now fixed costs in the short run? Again, we have to remember, okay, now to understand the two types of costs, we also have to look at the time period, right? Short run is a period of time during which at least one of the firm's inputs is fixed. Fixed time period and that we call as a short run. So in the short run, you find both fixed costs and variable costs. And output mother depend on a cost a variable, when that down, it's a fixed cost. So that both types of costs can be found in the short run. The long run, a period of time long enough to allow farm to vary all of its inputs. Adopt new technology, increase the land area, increase maybe buy new machines, and so on. So in the long run, all these costs become variable. Right. So if you ask me, how long is the short run and long run? There's no fixed answer. It depends on the characteristics of the farm, the revenue, the type, the size of the farm. Right? For example, now if I'm a small scale farmer, the short run for me could be 5 years. Right? But fixed inputs I can't buy more land, I can't buy new machines because I can't afford it. And therefore, my short run as a small scale farmer is 5 years. But for a large scale firm or a medium scale firm, it might be different. For a large scale firm, even 1 year would be the short run. The short run, okay, they can change. They can buy more land, they can buy more machines, increase the or change or vary the fixed inputs, right? So now, in this lesson, we are only going to look at short run cost, but you can also analyze the long run cost, which we will not do. We will only look at the short run cost functions.
Recording
Right.
stopped.
So since we have not taken a break, a long break, we will take a long break and we will meet at 12. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome back. So this is the afternoon session, and first we can start. So this is where we stopped before lunch, and we were looking at the total cost of the firm. And in order to make decisions, we need to know a few things that we can derive from the total cost function. So we said that since
Recording in
so actually
progress.
speaking, now the cost function is actually derived from the production function that you saw, that we discussed in the morning session. Cost is derived from the production function, right? So there's a relationship between cost and production. We will not derive do the derivation, but we will take it from cost function forward. So now we said that since cost quantity, the output is a function, now it depends on the cost of the firm. Cost of the firm depends on the quantity produced the firm. Right. So now we know that this cost is made up of two cost types, fixed cost and variable cost. So now cost, we call this as the total cost. TC stands for total cost, and FC is for some write as total fixed cost. Yeah, total fixed cost and total variable cost. So now this is the total variable cost and the total cost. So these two sums up to the total cost of the firm. And then the total fixed cost, right? So the total fixed cost is that, we discussed total fixed cost. Does not vary with the output, you know? Output එක වැඩි කරනකොට total fixed cost එක මෙන්න මේ cost එක වෙනස් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. But variable cost varies. Like for example, if you increase the amount of if you want to increase the amount of paddy produced, or if you want to increase crop output, then you will have to use more fertilizer. Right? So as you increase the amount of output, your variable cost will increase. But fixed cost does not vary or change with the level of output. Right. Now, since we're looking at the cost function in the short run, like I said, you can analyze the cost functions in the long run as well. But now in this lesson, we will only focus on the short run. Right. So how will the cost function look like? Now, how do you think it would look like? So we will see that as output increases, the total cost function increases. The total cost function increases. The total variable cost, actually, variable cost increases. What about the fixed cost? Now, this is the fixed cost. Why is this a horizontal line? Because we know the fixed cost in the short run does not vary with the output. Output එක මත depend වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Output එක කොච්චර වැඩි කරත් fixed cost එක වෙනස් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Fixed cost variable වෙන්න පටන් ගන්න in the long run. So in the short run, we have both fixed cost and variable cost. Fixed cost does not change with the output, but variable cost varies with the output. You know? I said that variable cost or the cost function is derived from the production function we discussed in the morning. Right? Therefore, there's a relationship between the cost function and the production function. So we say that the cost function is actually a mirror image of the production function. Therefore, you see this type of a cost function, right? It increases in the shape. It increases at an increasing rate, then it increases at a decreasing rate. And now we have the fixed cost and the variable cost. Now we need to draw the variable cost function, sorry, the total cost function. Now, total cost is a sum of these two costs. මේ දෙක එකතුවක් තමයි total cost function එක. එහෙනම් ඒක අපි කොයි විදිහට එයිද? So you see that it follows a similar shape as the variable cost function, and this difference is actually the variable cost. Sorry, the fixed cost, right? The difference is the fixed cost because it does not vary with the output. So total and the variable cost function takes this shape. It increases as the output increases. When you start at 0, and as the output increases, the cost increases this way. Right. Now, using this total cost function, we can derive two other costs, right? One, this is actually one total cost. The second relationship that we will derive is the average cost, right? But now we are familiar with this term, and whenever we hear the term average, we know it's per unit, right? Per unit. And we said that the cost varies or it depends on the quantity or the output produced, right? Output එක මතන quantity එක cost එක depend on it. What's the average cost? Average cost is actually the total cost. My total cost එක divided by this output. Output is a Q now, divided by Q. Meaning it's the cost per unit of output, isn't it? Output ekakam, cost ekam. Cost per unit of output. So that's the average cost. Then the third relationship is the marginal cost. Right, so can you derive a relationship with the marginal cost? Because now we are familiar with the term marginal. Marginal cost is the change in output, sorry, change in cost to a change in output. Change in cost to a change in output. The additional cost incurred, if you change, you start at 0 and the first item, any item produce කරනකොට වැඩිපුර යන cost එක. තව එකකින් output එක එකකින් වැඩි කරොත් වැඩිපුර යන cost එක. Right? තවත් එකකින් වැඩි කරනවා. දෙකේ ඉඳලා තුනට වැඩි කරනවා production එක. වැඩිපුර යන cost එක. So that is the marginal cost. How would you write the formula? Now this little delta, this triangle denotes delta, meaning change in the total cost. Total cost එක වෙනස output එක එකකින් වැඩි කරනවා. එහෙනම් change කියලා කියන්නේ මේ. මෙතන නම් හිතමු මෙතන cost එක 10යි. මෙතන cost එක 20යි කියලා. එහෙනම් change in this marginal cost is actually change in the total cost, which is 10 here. मेरे पास वेनस 10. Change in quantity here is 1. The kendra turn marginal cost in there from when you increase out from 2 to 3 is 10, right? So you can see that the marginal cost is actually the slope of the total cost function, right? Slope right? Cost එක ප්‍රමාණවත් This is the cost, this is the output. Output එක එකකින් වැඩි වෙනකොට cost එක වැඩි වෙන ප්‍රමාණය. නේ change in C මේ දෙක අතර වෙනස බෙදනවා. ඒක අපි කියනවා slope එක කියලා. Marginal cost is actually the slope of the total cost function. Right. Now, in order to make decisions like the optimum production, in order to price the product, you would have heard of when you do marketing or pricing, you would have heard of cost plus pricing, marginal cost pricing, average cost pricing. So therefore, it's important that we derive these terms in order to identify, take certain decisions in terms of production and pricing. Right. Because at the end of the day, we know we are trying to minimize the cost in order to maximize the profit. So if you plot these on a curve, the total cost, average cost, marginal cost. Now, average cost, if I take average cost out, average cost is actually what? Average cost is total cost over Q. Now, අපි දන්නවා total cost කියලා කියන්නේ variable cost plus fixed cost. Now, මේක තව විදිහකට ලියන්න පුළුවන් expand කරන fixed cost plus variable cost over Q. එහෙනම් variable cost එකයි fixed cost එකයි දෙකම Q වලින් බෙදලා අපිට එනවා average fixed cost plus average variable cost. Now, average cost එක අපිට හොයාගන්න පුළුවන් ඔක්කො total cost එක Q වලින් බෙදලා එහෙම නැත්නම් you can divide this separately and it's also average cost plus average variable cost plus average fixed cost, right? So now let's plot these on a curve. If you plot the curves, marginal cost, average cost, average variable cost, average fixed cost, how will these costs look like? Right. Now this is the average fixed cost, which is fixed cost divided by output, if this is Q, divided by Q. And average variable cost is very simply variable cost divided by Q. Right? So what do you see? Now average fixed cost gradually decreases, right? Zero when I put a sub there, there's no cost. At 1, this is little cost, there's a higher cost, and then gradually as you increase the output from 0, the fixed cost decreases. The variable cost, average variable cost comes to a minimum and it starts decreasing. And then the average total cost. So average total cost is the sum of these two, average variable cost and average fixed cost. And then you have the marginal cost. Marginal cost again. As you increase the output from 0, each time you produce one extra unit of output, the additional cost that you incur as you increase the level of output, each time, one by one, right? Marginal costing. That too reduces gradually and comes to a minimum, and then it increases. Right? Now, another interesting thing is actually, so let's come back to this graph in a minute. Let's try to calculate the total cost, these costs. Now the question has given us the yield, which is the output, and the total fixed cost and the total variable cost. And then we are asked to find the total cost of this firm at each level of production, and then average variable cost, average fixed cost, average cost, and the marginal cost. Right now, we know that. So give it a try. I'll write the notations or the formula on this side. Total cost is made up of average variable cost plus the fixed cost, and then average cost is actually total cost divided by Q, in this case it's Y, and average cost is also made up of variable cost divided by Y plus fixed cost divided by Y. This is average variable cost. This is average fixed cost. And then the marginal cost is actually the change in the total cost to a change in Y. Right. So what do you see here? We see that as yield increases, when you produce 40, the variable cost is 89, fixed cost is 75. Right? But you can see that as you increase the yield, the total variable cost increases gradually, but the fixed cost remains constant. It's constant. Why? Because it does not depend on the yield, right? We're almost 75. It does not depend on the yield in the short run, but in the long run, this will also change. Right. So now, can you calculate these values? Because the formulas are given. Simple. At least try to work it out until the fourth one.
Recording stopped.
question. Now, total cost, we said the firm's total cost is actually made up of
Recording in progress.
cost is made up of what? The variable cost and the fixed cost, right? There's a cost that varies. Let's say the production of a unit of a crop, right? A bushel of a crop. And that varies with the variable cost, like fertilizer. You will have to, if you want to increase from 50 units to 60 units, you might have to increase the level of fertilizer. That's a variable cost, right? What else? It might need more people working, so labor charges will increase, labor costs. So all that is included in variable cost, VC, right? Then there's another part which does not vary with the output, right? The fixed costs are there. So that fixed cost does not vary with the output. But however, in the short run, the total cost is made up of variable cost and the fixed cost. So for the first one, what would be the the total cost? It's 89 plus 75, isn't it? Total cost is made up of variable cost. Variable cost and fixed cost. Now here, it might be a little confusing because there's a T here. It means total fixed cost, yeah? Total fixed cost. Total fixed cost and total variable cost. Sorry, total variable cost, and some people say total fixed cost. So don't worry, it means the same thing, fixed cost and variable cost. So this is made up of the total fixed cost and the total variable cost. So total sum of these two, and this gives me 164. Right, let's do the second one. Now, 110 plus 75 is 185. So let's do the third one. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. So it adds up to 205, isn't it? So the total cost is 105. Okay, is that clear? Right. Okay, then let's calculate the average variable cost, which is easy. Average variable cost. The variable cost per unit of output, right? Variable cost per unit of output. Okay, now we need to know that they've given us a variable cost, which is this one. Variable cost is given. So it would be 89 divided by average variable cost के लिखा है variable cost divided by output. Level of output is 40. For this one, the second one, it's 110 divided by 50. You'll have to find the values, right? 110 divided by 50. Okay, so just find the values. Use calculate and you can calculate the values. Right, then average fixed cost. Simple fixed cost over y. Fixed cost here, but then y value. Right, so fixed cost does not vary. Divided by 40. Here also it's 75 divided by 50. Now, can you say that as you go down, as you increase the level of output, the fixed cost does not change, it's fixed. Therefore, each time you are dividing this fixed cost by an increasing number. If fixed cost is fixed, ඒක හැම වෙලෙම බෙදෙන්නේ වැඩි වෙන number එකකින්. එහෙනම් what would happen if each time you divide a fixed number by an increasing number, you get less and less. ඒක තමයි මේ fixed cost එක output එක වැඩි කරනකොට එන්න අඩු වෙගෙන යන්නේ. Right? This curve. Right. What else? Average cost then. Now, average cost we know is either you can divide the total cost by y, or you can add these two together. දෙවිදිහකට හොයාගන්න පුළුවන් අපිට එකක් මේ total cost එක බෙදන්න පුළුවන්. 164 කියන total cost එක බෙදනවා 40 වලින්. You should get the same answer if you add these two together. මේ දෙක එකතු කරත් එන්න ඕනේ එකම answer එක. Then this one 185 over 50. Right? This cost divided by the level of output. What about the marginal cost? We are told, or we know, that marginal cost is the change in the total cost or change in y. Now, change in the total cost. This difference is how much? 21. This difference is 20. Okay. So, for example, here, when you produce this 50th unit, when you increase from 40 to 50, the marginal cost is 185 over this difference. So that is actually, 10. 1, not 185, it's 20, isn't it? 20. This difference is 20 when you move from 50 to 60, and this difference is, so when you produce the 50th unit, right, there you get 21 over 10. When you produce the 60th unit, the marginal cost is, this difference is 20. So 20 over, output difference is 10. 10. Right? So likewise, we can calculate the marginal cost at each of these points. Right. So now, are there any questions? So these calculated values, if you plot them on a graph, on the same graph, you will get this graph, isn't it? So now this is interesting. Now, if you look at this cost, the marginal cost curve, what does this mean? It's the cost that you incur, or the additional cost, when you increase or when you produce one extra unit of output. Output එකකින් වැඩි කරනකොට වැඩිපුර ලැබෙන cost එක, වැඩිපුර යන cost එක, marginal cost. Now, when a firm decides on its production, right, let's say pricing, we say the price in order to make a profit, where at the margin, we said marginal, the concept of marginality or marginal, this term is very important because economics would make decisions at the margin, we said. So to maximize profit, right, you would price the product where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. ඒ කියන්නේ එකකින් ලැබෙන benefit එක, එක output එකේ ලැබෙන benefit එක, ඒකට යන cost එක, වැඩිපුර එකට යන cost එකට සමාන වෙන තැන marginal benefit equals marginal cost. Now, in other words, marginal benefit is the benefit, the additional benefit that you get by selling one extra unit of output. Right? එකක් වැඩිපුර විකුණනකොට ලැබෙන වැඩිපුර ලැබෙන benefit එක. What's this called? එකක් විකුණනකොට වැඩිපුර ලැබෙන benefit එක කියන්නේ price එක, isn't it? එකක මිලනේ. So this is actually the price. මේ කියන්නේ මේ good එකේ price එක. Right? So you would price where the price you would maximize profit where the price equals marginal cost. Now, if I take one point, let's take this point. Value, random value, right? And that for that price, there is a particular cost. We'll call it Q1 and we'll call this P1, right? Random price P1 kilo sign for. At that price, you will sell your product amount of output products. Let's take another one, P2. P2 kilo value of we draw a price line all the way up to the marginal cost and all the way down. Fine, that's Q2. Right. So now I'm going to draw this on a separate curve. I will have P here and Q there. At P1, how much do you sell? Q1. Right, this amount. At P2, you sell Q2, which is less than Q1. So P2, sell Q2. Now, if I draw a line connecting these points, right. What do we call this line or curve? Have you seen this graph before? The price quantity relationship? Anyone? Can you remember what we call this curve, price quantity relationship? This is the supply curve, isn't it? The supply curve shows you the price point relationship of a. So we can say that the marginal cost curve of the firm actually reflects the supply curve, but not the entire marginal cost curve. Where will you stop? Now, you would price as a firm if you want to maximize profit or make any profit at all. A price would be a point which is above the average variable, minimum average variable cost curve. Cost එකට වඩා එකකින් ලැබෙන cost එකකට යන cost එකට වඩා ලැබෙන benefit එක වැඩි වෙන්න ඕනේ. එහෙනම් you would price above the average variable cost. Average variable කියලා කියන්නේ එකක මිල. එකට වඩා price එක වැඩි වෙන්න ඕනේ. Therefore you will not price below this minimum point. මේක තමයි මීට වඩා අඩු point එක price එක price කරන්නේ. You would price it above the average cost minimum point, right? So this area reflects the marginal cost curve, the supply curve of the firm. Marginal cost curve shows the supply curve of the firm, right? Any questions? Right, so what we discussed is the short-run cost functions. We can also look at the long-run cost functions, but we say that in the long run, the optimum or the ideal point to produce for a firm would be this area, right? Where you can see the cost, sorry, the average cost. Right? This area before the minimum cost function, right? The average variable cost minimum point is the optimum area to produce, and we call it we say that the economy is in has reached economies of scale. The firm has reached economies of scale because you see, as you increase the output level from zero in the output the cost of the firm is decreasing, isn't it? The average cost, so this is what you would expect in a large scale firm. As you increase the scale or scale out or scale up the production, your average cost decreases, right? So compared to a cottage industry or something you do at home, production you do at home, in a large scale firm, large scale bakery firm, any large scale firm, the average cost decreases as you increase the output, right? That's why they can make huge amounts of output. But after a point, it starts going up again. Now there we say we are reaching this economies of scale as average increases. So this might be because of wrong decisions. There's so many external factors as well as internal factors that could affect the production process, and you make the wrong decisions. And from that point, if you increase the output further, your average variable cost increases. Therefore, this is the ideal phase for a company or a firm to produce. Right. So given that background, we will move on to the next lesson. The next lesson is about market structures. So if you look at the economy around us, different industries, we see that different industries have different characteristics or features, right? So we can sort of categorize structures, market structures, by looking at certain characteristics, such as the pricing strategies, how they supply products, the barriers, efficiency, competition, and so on. So the market a firm is in influences how that firm behaves. Right? The market influences how the firm behaves. Market structure are those characteristics of the market that significantly affect the behavior and interaction of buyers and sellers. Right? So what then is a market? A market generally means a place or a geographical area. I mean, it could be a physical place or a virtual place where buyers and sellers with their goods meet to exchange goods for services or goods for money. Rather, in economics, market refers to a group of buyers and sellers who meet and do the transactions of commodities, goods and services, right? So buyers and sellers meet and then they exchange their goods and services for money, right? So that's a market. When it comes to market power, the ability of an individual or a group to substantially influence market price. The market structure they are in will determine their market power, right? For example, if you look at the different types of markets or industries, you see that some markets have just one seller, some markets have so many sellers, right? So therefore, if you are in a market with so many sellers, thousands, even more than that, your market power is quite low. But if you are the only firm operating, right? If you are the only firm that produces a certain good, then you have very high market power. You can price however you want. You can discriminate price. You can, charge different prices from different people, at different times. So if you are the only firm in the market, then you have very high market power. Otherwise, your market power reduces if you are in a market with so many other sellers. What do we mean by the term industry? So an industry is a collection of firms, each of which supplies products that have some degree of substitutability to the same potential buyers. There are common buyers for sellers, common sellers, buyers, and relatively homogeneous products. So let's take an example. Let's take the dairy industry, right? The fresh milk industry. There are large numbers of sellers and buyers. They sell the same product and you buy the same product, of course. So therefore, it says the products are relatively homogeneous. Now, if all of us, let's say there are 100 in this class, including myself, so all of us, if we are selling fresh milk, then seemingly fresh milk is homogeneous, isn't it? There could be quality differences. එක්ක lab test එකක් කරන්න ඕනේ නැත්නම් taste කරන ඇරෙන්න seemingly I don't know, some of you might be experts, but for lay people like us, fresh milk නම් හැමෝගාම තියෙන එකම fresh milk එක වගේනේ පේන්නේ, so it's homogeneous. Vegetable homogeneous, right? Paddy ගත්තොත් to a large extent it's homogeneous. There are different types of paddy, but we say in an industry you sell the same homogeneous product and they are substitutable, right? එකක් වෙනවනේ තව එකක් පාවිච්චි කරන්න පුළුවන්. Price ගත්තොත්, paddy ගත්තොත්, although all of us sell the same product, or because we sell the same product, it's substitutable. If a consumer comes to my farm and if I don't have paddy, then you can easily buy paddy from another person because it's substitutable, right? So that's the characteristic of an industry. So if you look at the characteristics of a market, there are, like we said, there are so many buyers and sellers. I mean, there are buyers, it could be one or it could be many. There's a contact between buyers and sellers. You meet or you over the telephone or whatever, you make a contact, you come to an agreement, and buyers and sellers deal with the same commodity, and there should be a price for the commodity bought and sold in the market. Right. Now let's look at the structures, different structures and characteristics of a market structure. Now any market will be made of different types and sizes of sellers and buyers. Could be many. Type of the product, homogeneous indala, heterogeneous products then pulo. Conditions of entry and exit are different. It's easy to enter certain markets. It's difficult to enter some other markets. Now, if I want to become a fruit seller, I have done agriculture, I have a background in production, I have some idea of pricing. So it's easily I can enter this market, fruit market, and sell my products. And whenever I want to stop, I can easily exit the market, right? But you can simply enter certain markets, but when it comes to certain other industries, it's very difficult. Like, say, if I want to become a mobile service provider or internet service provider, or I want to enter the pharmaceutical industry, or I want to enter the airline industry and start a new airline. So that's going to be very, very difficult for so many reasons. It could be that you need a very, very high capital and initial investment. There's a big regulative framework, so you can't really exit the market easily, even if you want to. So those are like two extremes, isn't it? Some markets easily enter and exit, some you can't. Transparency of information. Like I said, if I want to enter the fruit market as a vegetable or fruit seller, I might have all the information I need, right? About prices, about the input prices, quantities, quality, maintenance, and so on. The information is out there. I can easily find and enter this market. But for some markets, like the pharmaceutical industry, even if I want to produce a particular drug, I can't because I might not have the patent rights. I might not have information on the ingredients, right? So transparency is very low in certain markets. End-to-end exit anywhere information is transparent now. So on that premise, or on based on those characteristics, we can see 4 key types of markets. Now we are only discussing 4, but there could be other categories, but mainly there are 4 categories of markets. Right. So this is actually a continuum. Now, if you take the 2 extreme types of markets, on one end you find the perfectly competitive market, PCM we call it, perfect competition or perfectly competitive market. Right. So now read the characteristics of the market and tell me or give me a few examples of a market that has similar characteristics. Right? So I have a few examples of markets that has these characteristics, but you can think of more markets. Right? So it says there are a large number of buyers and sellers. They sell identical products, acts independently, meaning I don't want to do what the other seller does, maybe try increase my price or reduce my price. By looking at what the others do, I can act independently. Reasonably well informed, so meaning there's all the information is out there, it's transparent, free to enter and exit, and they are all price takers. Now, this is an ideal type of a market, right? So we have done a lot of the analysis assuming that we are dealing with a perfectly competitive market, right? So in a perfectly competitive market, for example, you would expect the supply and demand forces to determine the price. But there are no absolutely perfectly competitive markets in the real world, but there are markets that are very close to perfect competition, and agricultural markets are very close to perfect competition. For example, if you take paddy or wheat or maize or any livestock product, right? Fruit, vegetables. Now these come close to a perfectly competitive market. Why? Why? Because if you take the paddy market or the milk market, fresh milk market, you see large number of buyers and sellers, isn't it? Large number of sellers in this type of a market. Fruit gatta, my vegetables gatta, so many thousands of sellers and buyers. And they sell identical products. Like I said, paddy or fresh milk gatta, very, very similar products. There could be quality differences, but more or less homogeneous products. And it's free to enter and exit. Very easily you can enter this market. Right? And we call them, all the firms in this market are called price takers. Why do we call them as price takers? Because now in this market, this is a perfectly competitive market. Right? If you draw the market equilibrium for this type of a market, now we are familiar with the market equilibrium. This would be the demand, let's say the paddy, and supply for paddy. This would be the price that is decided by the industry or the market. Quantity. Right. So if all of us, if all 100 of us, let's say, are in this market selling paddy, we set the price together as a market, because the supply and demand forces, it's not like you talk and decide, but the supply and demand forces will determine the price. PQ, P stock in a price to determine karagattara passe. This is the industrial, it's called the market. There's the market where we all sell our product. And if you take one firm, if you take my firm, because we are all sellers, if you take my firm, Now we sell the product at this price. Right? So if you take an individual firm, I cannot decide. I mean, I can decide, but if I increase the price, what would happen? අපි හැමෝම එකම homogeneous product එක නම් sell කරන්නේ. If I increase my price, nobody would want to buy from me because everybody else sells at a cheaper price, the same good. So I will not make any profit. Instead, I will lose because nobody would buy from me, right? So I don't increase the price, or if I reduce the price again, of course, that's not going to bring me any additional profit. So I do not change the price. Instead, I maintain same price decided by the market. Right. So therefore, we are called price takers. The sellers in this market are price takers because we take the price decided by the market, right, or determined by the market. Right. So this is a perfectly competitive market where the competition is at its ideal level. This is what you would expect a market to be, but we know we don't live in perfectly competitive ideal markets. We live in less than perfect markets. So now we will look at some of those types of markets, right? So the other extreme is a monopoly, right? Other extreme is a monopoly. Monopoly. So monopoly, okay, read the characteristics and see if you can think of any examples other than the example that I have written here. Now, in a monopoly market, you find only one seller. So here we are looking at only the key types of markets, but you can further categorize. For example, if there are two markets, we call it a duopoly. Sorry, if there are two firms in the market, you call it a duopoly, and you can also further categorize by looking at the number of sellers. But here we're looking at buyers. So in a monopoly, you find only one seller of that particular product. Like a firm product that market is a monopoly, and this type of a market has very, very high market power because that firm can decide what to produce, how much, at what price. Those things you can decide freely. Right. For example, railway in Sri Lanka, water, tobacco. Now, why? Oh, there are reasons as to why a monopoly would come into being. A monopoly would be created. So let's look at some different types of monopolies. One is called natural monopoly. It's a situation where the cost of the products are minimized by having a single firm to produce a product. Now this happens if the initial investment or the cost is very very high. For example, the railway industry or the airline industry. You can think of others like the electricity, right? If you have to bear a huge amount of cost at the onset, then it sort of discourages others entering the market. So therefore, sometimes it may only be that the government is only monopoly, or it could be one or two private sector companies coming into the market, right? Right, the railway, for example, right? I mean, if you can come into an agreement to use the same railway tracks, then okay. But if they ask you to, do the infrastructure and start your own railway company, then that's a huge cost that the private sector will not want to bear. So, there could be maybe one other airline firm, private firm, and mostly it will be the government, right? Unless you can bear cost. So natural monopoly happens that way. Then geographic monopoly is based on the absence of other sellers in a certain geographic area. So the name gives you a clue that this monopoly is based on geographic conditions. For example, tea, we know that it's not a monopoly, but if let's say tea, if tea can be produced with the highest quality in Sri Lanka, then it can become a monopoly. Or if gold is only produced in South Africa, then that becomes a monopoly. If a particular product can only be produced in cold conditions in Nuwara in Sri Lanka, then that becomes a geographic monopoly, right? Oil, for example. So, yeah. Then technological monopolies. So again, name gives you a clue that monopoly is based on technology, patents, and copyrights mainly. For example, if I have a firm to produce a pharmaceutical drug, and if I have the patent, only I will be able to produce. So I will not give it to any other party. Therefore, that's a patent. That's a technological monopoly. Copyrights. We know artwork, literary work, software have copyrights. So it discourages, so it stops others from manufacturing the same good or service, and you become a monopoly, technological monopoly, because of these reasons. Again, you will see government monopolies have become monopolies due to certain regulatory or statutory reasons, such as military or defense. This can only be run by the government, and it will not allow military weapons dealing, for example, to be done by private sector for security reasons. Right? Water, sewage also might be a government monopoly. For example, we know that the private sector would not want to enter into a business where the cost is greater than the benefit, right? But the government will not, their motive is not only to make profit. So even if the costs are higher, you would still have to run this, maintain this service. So sewage, for example, might be a government monopoly because that's the only entity in the market. Right. So how would this type of a firm, a monopoly, price its product? Now, this has the highest amount of market power. You can price wherever you want. You can discriminate price. Therefore, how will it decide where to price the product? And so by now, we've discussed the cost theory and the production theory. So now let's use those theories to identify pricing. Right, so we say in order to maximize the profit, right, we will write profit using this letter pipe. So profit is maximized. If you are to get a maximum profit, the firm would price where the marginal revenue of the firm, right, equals the marginal benefit. We discussed this earlier also, or marginal cost. Profit maximizing firm will maximize its profit where marginal revenue, if you price where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? Right. So now, if you want to identify the price, first thing to do is to identify the amount of quantity to produce. Right. So let's do that we'll start with a familiar graph. Price and quantity, right? So we are familiar with this graph. And now we are going to draw the cost curves. What's the name of this curve? What do we name this? It's either the average variable cost or the total cost, and we will draw the average variable cost now. As you can draw the variable, we draw the average variable cost curve, and I will also draw the marginal cost curve. Marginal cost curve goes through the minimum point of the average variable cost curve. Now that's there. What else do we need? Now we have the cost curves, right? We also need to draw the revenue curves. Now this is the average revenue curve. Average revenue curve of the firm is actually the demand curve, right? And this is the marginal revenue curve. Marginal revenue curve and the average revenue curve of the firm. Now, if you know the revenue curves and the cost curves, now we can find the profit maximizing quantity to produce. So can you spot or can you identify that particular point? Now, we said in order to maximize profit, we produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So marginal cost curve is given, this purple curve. Revenue curve is this green curve. So where it intersects each other, it crosses each other, it's the optimum point. So if you draw a line from that point, with a cross-end point in the palm head angle, that's the optimum profit maximizing quantity to produce. Okay, now we need to find the price and the profit, right? To find the price, we know that the demand curve shows the price, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a dotted line all the way up to the demand curve. All the way up to the demand curve. This is the demand curve, average revenue curve. And average revenue means the revenue of one unit, right? Revenue per unit. එකකින් ලැබෙන revenue. එකකින් ලැබෙන revenue. price කියලා කියන්නේ අපි එකක මිල නේ. Price would be that point there. So this would be the price per unit. So now we can also find the profit. To find the profit, how do you find the profit? Profit is revenue minus cost, isn't it? Right. So cost is actually, how do you find the cost? Now, this is average variable cost curve. Again, this shows us the cost per unit. Ekaka cost pennana and ekaka cost. If you can see that this dotted line crosses this curve there. So if you draw a line all the way there, this is per unit cost. Ekaka cost amount number of units produced and ekaka mila cost. Sorry, ekaka cost number it gives us the total cost. Right. Then the revenue. Revenue is what? This is the price of one product times the number of products. It is a price setting serves as the revenue. The difference between revenue and cost is actually the profit. So the profit is this area, right? That is the profit of the firm. So now for a monopoly, you can price wherever you want. You can even discriminate, meaning you can charge different prices from different groups of people. For example, you can price, let's take a movie ticket. You can charge less from senior citizens or from students and charge more from the others. And so you can discriminate price depending on how much they're willing to pay, for example. Or you can price, you can charge different prices from different categories. Like, for example, in an airline, in the economic class, if you buy upfront in advance, you might pay more, but towards the end, they usually send whatever the seats available at a cheaper price. And so they have different prices for the same product, right? Off peak and peak, right? Same product, but off peak, same price, you get same product, you charge different prices. So that's you can discriminate product or price wherever you want in an imperfectly competitive market. Right. So now let's look at another type of market structure. So we discussed the perfectly competitive market and then the monopoly, and now we are going to look at monopolistic competition. Okay, so you would have read the characteristics. Can you think of examples? Now, there are a large number of firms, but differentiated products compete on product quality and pricing. And now, so there are a large number of firms, but because there are a large number of firms, there are lots of substitutes for this type of a market, right? So all conditions of perfect competition are met except products are not identical. They are differentiated, right? For example, if you take the biscuit industry, there are so many types of biscuits, isn't it? So it's substitutable. එකක් price එක වැඩි කරොත් තව එකකට easily යන්න පුළුවන්. Biscuits, toothpaste, jams, cordials. So there are lots of producers, lots of sellers in the market, and they are differentiated. You see a lot of non-price competition compared to price competition. Why? Because there are lots of substitutes, right? Lots of substitutes. Buyers would move to another seller. Price competition they focus on non-price competition, like advertising, giving a better service, a buy one get one free offers. So promotions, on nutritional quality, why their product is better than the other products, and so on. You try to attract consumers using non-price competition rather than price competition. And where will they price? Again, since this is again an imperfectly competitive market, they would price where their marginal cost equals marginal revenue. You will draw the same graph like this, but the only thing is now, because there are substitutes, we know that we discussed this under elasticity. The slope of the demand curve will vary because relatively inelastic. So, sorry, relatively elastic because there are lots of substitutes. Therefore, the slope would vary. Right? So you would draw a similar curve with this monopoly, right? Okay. Then the last one, oligopoly. Oligopoly is, you can say it's a little closer to monopoly, because there are few firms in this type of a market, very few firms, but each of the firms are trying to get a high market share. And they're also price makers, or we say price setters. So except the perfectly competitive market, perfectly competitive market with the price take again, all other firms are price setters or makers because they can decide on their own price. Right. So food chains, fast food chains, think of more examples. I'm sure there are few oligopolies in Sri Lanka or oligopoly markets. Let's say internet service providers. There are few, isn't it? Less than 9 in Sri Lanka, and they are trying to compete for a higher market share. What else? Can you think of any other oligopolies in Sri Lanka? Now, in this type of market, since there are few, right, less than 9 firms in the market, like the internet service providers, the mobile SIM providers, Kia Dialogue, Mobitel, or whatever, like less than 9, isn't it? Few firms, but they want to increase their market share when if you consider their pricing, they would look at what the others do. Right? One firm would look at the pricing strategies or promotional strategies of the other firm, and they would try to follow the strategies that the other firm does, so that they don't lose out on their profit. Right? So they are very dependent on others. And another negative thing can be collusion. Now, if this oligopoly is made up of very strong firms, then they can get together and they can even fix prices, set prices. So what we try to say is that although there are few firms, they can act as one firm, and we call it collusion, right? OPEC, for example, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So in the Middle East, the petroleum exporting countries have come together and they formed this organization called OPEC, and they would not allow other countries to enter into this organization. Instead, they try to fix price and run the oil industry in the world. So we know how strong OPEC is. They can influence politics, they can influence economies, right? We have witnessed this as an economy. So collusion can be bad. Therefore, the governments would try to minimize the formation of collusion, so they don't get together and influence certain economic decisions, economic conditions. So, and the other thing that you would see in this type of an oligopoly is the demand curve is, we know the demand curve should look like this, isn't it? But instead, in this type of a firm, after a certain price, the demand shifts this way, right? It comes down, and after a certain price, it shifts this way. So we call it a kinked demand curve. Kinked demand curve because the demand curve shifts. Right, so let's say now, like I said, this is the market price, and what we're trying to say here is these competitors would look at what the other firm does. If you increase the price, what would happen? Let's say at this price, you were selling this amount of quantity, and if the price increases to this much, right, you can increase the quantity. Your quantity would reduce, plus your buyers would go to other sellers. So as a result, you would lose out. And also, even if you reduce the price, if you bring the price down, if you reduce the price, you can see since the slope now, the demand curve slope is very steep, the quantity that you can sell at this lower price is small, right? Therefore, again, you will lose out if you reduce the price too much. So you would always look at what the other firm does and follow suit. Now, this is a summary of the market structures, so you can compare. Right, so have a look at the slides. All the slides are on LMS. Go through, and next week we will discuss a few applications.
Recording stopped.
We will discuss a few applications of what we have learned so far and some, let's say, macroeconomics if we have time. And also, since we have to do an exam, we will discuss a few model questions, right? If some MCQ questions, but it's good if you can go through the slides, sort of, just if there are any clarifications, you can always contact me or we can discuss next week before the lecture. So you're ready to sort of discuss some model questions. Okay, so any questions from what discussed so far? Page, so there's a question, page number 81, slide number 81, you mean? You don't have to take a screenshot, it's actually all there on the desk, okay? The set of slides are there, I don't know where they do. I think it's a mistake. Can you repeat the question? Right, so all the slides are there on LMS. No need to take screenshots. Right, so we will stop here then. And okay, great. Right, so I'll see you next week then. Thank you.
Thank you, madam.